The notification popped up on my phone at 11:47 p.m. Lab results available. Click to view. 3 weeks of waiting, 3 weeks of Christie's increasingly cold stares across the dinner table, 3 weeks of her whispering into her phone in the next room. I should have known something was wrong when she insisted we both get tested. I should have known when she smiled, that particular smile, the one she used when she'd already made up her mind about something. My name is Tommy Harris, and I'm about to tell you how my wife destroyed my life with a lie so calculated, so vicious, that it took me months to understand the true depth of her betrayal. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the moment everything began to unravel. 3 months earlier, my father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. He'd been a quiet man, worked construction his whole life, never talked much about money. So when his lawyer called me into the office and slid a folder across the mahogany desk, I nearly fell out of my chair. $2.3 million, the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. Plus the lakeside property in Kelly's Island. Your father was more careful with his money than most people knew. I drove home in a daze, the legal documents sitting on my passenger seat like they might evaporate if I looked away. Christy was in the kitchen when I walked in, stirring something on the stove, her blonde hair pulled back in that messy bun she wore when she was thinking hard about something. "How'd it go?" she asked without turning around. "We're rich," I said quietly. "Dad left us over $2 million. The wooden spoon clattered against the pot. She spun around, eyes wide. "What did you just say?" I showed her the papers, watched her scan the numbers, watched her expression shift from shock to something else, something hungry. "Tommy," she breathed, sinking into a kitchen chair. "Do you realize what this means? We can finally have the life we've talked about, the house we want, the family we've been planning." That night, we stayed up until dawn making plans. Real plans. The kind of future that had always felt like a distant dream when I was pulling wire through walls for $47,000 a year. But I didn't quit my job. Didn't change anything, really. The money felt too big, too sudden. I wanted to be careful with it. Christy had different ideas. "Why are you still getting up at 6 a.m.? She asked one morning, watching me lace up my work boots. "You don't have to do this anymore." "I like the work," I said. "And we don't need to spend it all at once." Her smile tightened. "We don't need to live like we're poor anymore either." The first crack appeared 2 weeks later. I came home from a particularly brutal day, rewiring an old factory, to find Christy on the phone in the living room, her voice hushed and urgent. I know, she was saying, "but things are different now. The situation has changed completely." She spotted me in the doorway and quickly ended the call. "Work emergency," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Since when does the yoga studio have emergencies?" "You'd be surprised." Her laugh sounded forced. "I'm going to take a shower." That night in bed, I tried to bring up the money again. Our plans, our future. But Christy seemed distant, distracted. When I reached for her, she pulled away. "I'm tired," she murmured. "Long day." 3 weeks after the inheritance, over dinner at the Italian place downtown, Christy set down her wine glass and looked at me with that calculated expression I was starting to recognize. "If we're going to start a family for real," she said, "maybe we should both get tested. Make sure everything's working properly." I nearly choked on my pasta. "Tested? Christy, we're both healthy. We've been trying for less than a year." "But now we have the resources to do it right," she pressed. "IVF, fertility treatments, whatever it takes. I just want to know where we stand." Something in her tone made my stomach clench, but I agreed. Love makes you stupid sometimes. I scheduled the appointment for the following week. Dr. Patterson's office was sterile and cold, the kind of place that smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. I provided my sample, answered the questions, tried not to think about why Christy had been so insistent about this. The technician who handled my case was a young woman with dark hair and nervous hands. "Angela Reyes," she said, introducing herself. "I'll be processing your results today." Something about her demeanor struck me as odd. She seemed to recognize Christy when we walked in together, though neither of them acknowledged it directly. A brief nod, a fleeting glance, the kind of interaction you'd have with someone you knew but didn't want to be seen knowing. Christy once mentioned that Angela had quit her lab job to focus on teaching yoga full-time, but clearly she still had access. 2 weeks later, the results came back. 0 active count, completely infertile. I stared at the report until the words blurred together. The doctor was saying something about treatments, about options, but all I could hear was the sound of my future crumbling. When I got home, Christy was waiting in the living room, still in her yoga clothes. "Well?" she asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. I handed her the report without a word, watched her read it, watched her face go through the motions of surprise, disappointment, sympathy. But underneath all that performance, I caught something else. Relief. "I'm sorry," she said, but her voice was flat. "This must be devastating for you." "For both of us," I corrected. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I need some time to process this." She processed it for exactly 72 hours. On Friday evening, she came home with papers from a divorce attorney. "I can't do this," she said, not even bothering to sit down. "I want children, Tommy. I've always wanted children. I'm 37 years old. I don't have time to waste on this." "This," I repeated. "You mean me?" "I mean a situation that can't give me what I need." "There are options," I said desperately. "Adoption donor." "I want my own children," she snapped. "I want a normal family with a man who can give me that." The divorce papers hit the coffee table with a soft thud. Christy was already heading for the stairs. "I'll be staying at my sister's," she called over her shoulder. "My lawyer will be in touch about the settlement." And just like that, 13 years of marriage ended. Not with a fight, not with tears, not even with an argument. Just a clinical decision delivered like a business transaction. The settlement demand arrived 3 days later. Christy wanted half of everything, including the inheritance. Her lawyer argued that since we'd used some of the money for joint expenses, a new roof, some appliances, the entire amount had become marital property. But there was something else in those papers that made my heart sink. Christy was claiming I had been financially controlling throughout our marriage, that I had prevented her from accessing marital funds, and made unilateral decisions about major purchases. None of it was true. But in the context of a divorce, perception often mattered more than reality. That's when I called Rachel Kwan. Rachel's office was in a converted Victorian downtown, the kind of place where serious people handled serious problems. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. Korean-American, I guessed, though I'd learned long ago not to make assumptions about people. "Mr. Harris," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I've reviewed your case file. Your wife is making some aggressive claims about the inheritance." "Can she do that?" I asked. "It was my father's money." "In Ohio, inheritance is typically separate property," Rachel explained, pulling out a legal pad. "But if marital funds were commingled with inherited funds, or if inherited funds were used for joint expenses, the court might consider it fair game." My heart sank. "We did use some of it, maybe $30,000 for home improvements." "That complicates things," Rachel admitted. "But there's something else in your file that bothers me. This fertility test that precipitated the divorce. When was your last physical?" "About a year ago." "Annual checkup through work. And everything was normal?" "Yeah, standard panels, the whole thing. Why?" Rachel leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her lips. "Because complete infertility doesn't usually develop overnight in healthy men. And the timing of this test, right after you inherited money." She shook her head. "It feels convenient." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to see the actual lab work, not just the report your wife showed you." Over the next week, as Rachel worked on getting access to the lab records, I started noticing things. Christy had moved in with her sister, but neighbors mentioned seeing her around town with a new man. Tall, athletic, expensive clothes. Someone asked if I knew about her new fitness coach boyfriend, Connor Lane. I looked him up online, found his social media profiles full of motivational quotes and shirtless gym photos. The kind of guy who sold expensive personal training packages to wealthy housewives. The kind of guy Christy had always found attractive, but claimed she was too mature to actually want. Apparently, $2 million had matured her right out of that phase. It took 2 weeks and a court order, but we got the records. What we found made my head spin. The test had been processed by a lab technician named Angela Reyes. According to Christy's social media, Angela was someone she knew from her yoga class. But more importantly, when Rachel's investigator dug deeper, we discovered that Angela had been fired from the lab 6 months earlier for irregularities in record keeping. She was still using her access codes, Rachel explained, spreading the documents across her desk. Someone called in a favor. "You think Christy asked her to fake the results?" "I think we need to find out." Rachel's investigator was a former police detective named Mike Torres. Quiet guy, methodical, the kind of person who noticed things other people missed. Within a week, he'd tracked down Angela's current address and employment. More importantly, he'd found a former colleague of hers who was willing to talk. Angela bragged about it, the former colleague said during our meeting at a coffee shop downtown. Her name was Lisa, and she looked nervous, constantly glancing around like she expected someone to be watching. Said her yoga friend needed help getting out of a marriage. Something about editing a PDF file, making it look like the husband couldn't have kids. She thought it was funny. Funny how? Rachel asked. Like it was some kind of clever scheme. Angela always thought she was smarter than everyone else. She said the guy would never know because men don't understand medical stuff anyway. Rachel had brought a small recording device, which Lisa had agreed to. The recording was devastating. This is fraud, Rachel said after we'd left the coffee shop. Criminal fraud. We need to move fast before they destroy any evidence. But first, we needed more. Mike Torres spent another week digging into Angela's life, tracking her movements, building a timeline. What he found was even more damaging than we'd hoped. Angela had been struggling financially since losing her job at the lab. Her current employment was part-time work at a different medical facility, barely enough to cover her expenses. But 3 weeks after my test results came back, the same day Christy filed for divorce, Angela had made a $5,000 deposit into her checking account. Cash deposit, Mike explained, showing us the bank records he'd obtained through legal channels. No source listed, but the timing is pretty suspicious. We also discovered that Angela and Christy had been in much closer contact than either of them had let on. Phone records showed dozens of calls between them in the weeks leading up to my test, including a lengthy conversation the night before my results were supposed to be ready. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Rachel filed motions to freeze all assets, halt the divorce proceedings, and compel the lab to preserve all electronic records related to my case. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Christy's face when she'd read that fake report, the performance of disappointment, the calculated sympathy. Judge Martinez was a stern woman in her 50s, who looked like she'd seen every type of family court drama imaginable. She listened to Rachel's presentation with the focus of a hawk studying prey. "Your Honor," Rachel said, standing at the plaintiff's table, "we have evidence that Mrs. Harris conspired to falsify medical records in order to manipulate these divorce proceedings. We're requesting an immediate forensic audit of the laboratory's computer systems." Christie's lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Patterson, objected vigorously. "This is a desperate attempt to delay inevitable proceedings, Your Honor. My client has done nothing wrong. Furthermore," Patterson continued, rising from his seat, "these allegations are based on hearsay and speculation. My client's decision to end her marriage was based on legitimate medical information provided by a licensed facility." Judge Martinez studied the preliminary evidence for what felt like an hour. Finally, she looked up. "I'm granting the asset freeze," she announced. "All marital property will be held in escrow pending investigation. The court will also order a complete forensic examination of the laboratory's records." Christie's face went white. I watched her lean over to whisper frantically to her lawyer, saw him shake his head grimly. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something that wasn't despair. But Christy wasn't going down without a fight. That evening, she showed up at my house. I was in the garage working on my truck, trying to keep my hands busy, while my mind raced through everything that had happened in court. I heard the front door slam and footsteps in the hallway. "Tommy," she called out. "We need to talk." I found her in the living room, pacing like a caged animal. She looked different, thinner, more frantic. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup. "This is insane," she said the moment she saw me. "You're going to destroy both of us over some conspiracy theory." "Conspiracy theory?" I kept my voice level. "Christy, we have evidence. You have accusations from some disgruntled former employee who probably has her own agenda." She stepped closer, and I could see desperation in her eyes. "Do you really think I'm capable of something like this?" 2 weeks ago, I would have said no. She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I made a mistake, okay? I panicked when I saw those results. But that doesn't mean I orchestrated some elaborate fraud." "Then explain the phone calls. Explain the money Angela deposited." Christy's expression shifted, and for just a moment, I saw something calculating flash across her features. "What phone calls? What money?" "Don't," I held up a hand. "Don't make this worse by lying to my face." She was quiet for a long moment, studying me like she was trying to figure out her next move. Finally, she sank into the armchair by the window. "Okay," she said quietly. "Maybe I did ask Angela for a favor." My stomach dropped, even though I'd been expecting this admission. Hearing her say it out loud was different. What kind of favor? I asked her to adjust the results. Make them look worse than they were. Worse than they were? Christy, the real results show I'm completely normal. She looked up sharply. What? We got the original files, before Angela edited them. There's nothing wrong with me. The color drained from her face. That's not... She said she was just going to make them look a little concerning. Something we could work around, but that would give me some leverage in the divorce. Leverage for what? For the money. The words exploded out of her, and she immediately looked like she regretted saying them. For my future, Tommy. I'm 37 years old. I've spent 13 years working at a yoga studio for barely above minimum wage while we lived like we were broke even when we weren't. We weren't broke before the inheritance either. We weren't rich. She stood up, pacing again. Do you know what it's like to watch your friends buy houses and take vacations and send their kids to good schools while you're clipping coupons and shopping at thrift stores? So you decided to steal my inheritance. I decided to take what I deserved. Her voice was rising now, the careful mask she'd worn for so many years finally slipping completely. 13 years, Tommy. 13 years of being the good wife, the supportive wife, while you played it safe and never took any risks. Playing it safe kept us fed and housed. Playing it safe kept us poor. She spun around to face me, eyes blazing. And then suddenly there's all this money and you want to just... what? Keep living like nothing changed. I wanted to be smart about it. You wanted to control it, just like you controlled everything else in our marriage. I stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the woman I'd actually been married to. Not the sweet, supportive partner I thought I knew, but someone who'd been keeping score for years, calculating what she was owed. Get out, I said quietly. Tommy, get out of my house, now. She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have warned her off. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then paused in the doorway. You'll regret this, she said. When Connor and I are married and living the life I should have had all along, you'll realize what you've lost. I already know what I've lost, I replied. Turns out it wasn't much. The forensic audit took 3 weeks. When the results came back, they were even worse than I'd imagined. Angela Reyes had accessed the lab system remotely on the day before my results were supposed to be ready. She'd opened my file, edited the PDF report to show 0 activity, and saved it back to the system. But here's what she didn't know. The lab's backup system automatically saved copies of all original files before any edits were made. The real report showed a normal, healthy count. But that wasn't all. The computer forensics team had also recovered deleted text messages from Angela's work phone. The conversations between her and Christy were laid out in devastating detail. Christy, can you make them look really bad? Like no hope at all? Angela, how bad is really bad? Christy, bad enough that no one would blame me for leaving. Angela, that's going to cost extra. Christy, how much extra? Angela, $5,000, and you never got this from me. Christy, deal. When can you do it? Rachel scheduled another emergency hearing. This time she came armed with everything. The original lab results, the computer forensics, Angela's employment records, the financial trail, and the recovered text messages. Your Honor, Rachel said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. The defendant orchestrated an elaborate fraud designed to steal my client's inheritance and destroy his marriage under false pretenses. The evidence is overwhelming. She laid it out piece by piece. The yoga class connection, Angela's illegal access to the lab systems, the fake results, the payment, the text messages discussing how to make the fraud convincing. Judge Martinez's expression grew darker with each revelation. When Rachel finished her presentation, the judge turned to Christy's lawyer. Does your client have any response to these allegations? Patterson looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence and... Mr. Patterson, the judge interrupted. I've seen a lot of creative approaches to divorce settlements in my courtroom, but falsifying medical records to defraud a spouse? That's a new low. She turned her attention to Christy, who was slumped in her chair like a deflated balloon. Mrs. Harris, you are hereby ordered to appear before this court next week to show cause why you should not be held in contempt. Additionally, all your claims to marital property are dismissed with prejudice. The inheritance remains the separate property of your husband. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Outside the courthouse, Christy tried to approach me. She looked terrible, pale, thin, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "Tommy," she said, her voice breaking. "Can we talk, please?" "Talk to my lawyer," I said, not stopping. "I made a mistake," she called after me. I was scared. I was thinking about my future, about what I wanted. I turned around. "You destroyed my life for money, Christy. You made me believe I was broken just so you could justify leaving me." "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "I just wanted out. I wanted a different life." "You got it," I said. "Enjoy it." But the legal system wasn't done with Christy yet. The criminal charges came down a week later. Angela Reyes was arrested for computer fraud and falsifying medical records. Christy was charged as a co-conspirator. Both of them were looking at significant jail time. The arrest happened at Christy's sister's house. I wasn't there to see it, but the local news covered the story. "Yoga instructor allegedly conspired to falsify medical records in divorce fraud," the headline read. The video showed Christy being led away in handcuffs, her head down, reporters shouting questions she didn't answer. Her boyfriend Connor was notably absent from the coverage. During the months of legal proceedings, Rachel and I had spent countless hours together. Late nights reviewing documents, strategizing, building the case that would ultimately save my inheritance and expose the truth. Somewhere in all those meetings, something had shifted between us. It wasn't planned, wasn't calculated like everything Christy had done. It was just real. "I should probably mention something," Rachel said one evening as we finished reviewing the latest round of motions in her office. It was past 9 p.m. and we were both exhausted. "What's that?" She looked nervous, which was unusual for her. Rachel was always composed, always in control. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. I stared at her, not comprehending. "What?" "I found out yesterday. I know the timing is complicated, and I know this changes things between us professionally, but I kissed her. Right there in her law office, surrounded by case files and legal briefs and the wreckage of my marriage. I kissed her like my life depended on it. "Are you sure?" I asked when we finally broke apart. "Very sure," she said, smiling. 12 weeks. The irony was staggering. While Christy had been orchestrating an elaborate fraud to convince me I was infertile, I'd been proving the opposite with the woman who would become the most important person in my life. But Christy wasn't done trying to destroy what was left of my happiness. 3 months later, she called me from the county jail where she was being held pending trial. Her voice was different, harder, more desperate. "I heard about Rachel," she said without preamble. "I heard she's pregnant." "Yeah," I said. "She is." "Congratulations," Christy said, but there was venom in her voice. "I'm sure you're very happy." "I am. You know this proves it, right? That you're fertile? That everything I did was unnecessary?" "I already knew that, Christy. The lab records proved it. But now everyone will know. Everyone will see that I destroyed my marriage for nothing." I was quiet for a moment, listening to the background noise of the jail. Voices, metal doors, the constant hum of institutional life. "You didn't destroy your marriage for nothing," I said finally. "You destroyed it for $2 million. The fertility thing was just your excuse." "That's not true." "Isn't it? You started planning this the day we got the inheritance. Maybe even before. You saw an opportunity to cash out and start over with someone you thought was more successful, more impressive. The fake test results were just your way of making yourself feel better about it." She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Connor left me," she said. "The day I was arrested, he said he couldn't be associated with someone facing criminal charges." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "No, you're not. I'm sorry that you're the kind of person who would do what you did. I'm sorry that 13 years meant so little to you that you'd throw them away for money. And I'm sorry that you picked a guy who turned out to be exactly as shallow as you were." "You're cruel," she whispered. "I'm honest. There's a difference." She hung up without saying goodbye. The trial was a media circus. The local papers ate up the story of the yoga instructor and the lab technician who conspired to fake fertility tests for divorce money. Angela Reyes pled guilty and testified against Christy in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony was devastating. "She told me exactly what she wanted," Angela said from the witness stand, her voice shaking. "She said her husband had just inherited money, and she wanted out of the marriage but needed a reason that would make her look sympathetic. She specifically asked me to make it look like he could never have children. "And you agreed?" the prosecutor asked. "She offered me $5,000. I needed the money." "Did Mrs. Harris ever express any doubt about what she was asking you to do?" "No, she seemed to think it was clever. She said he would never know the difference because men don't understand medical reports anyway." Christie's defense attorney tried to paint her as a desperate woman who made one bad decision, but the evidence was overwhelming. The text messages, the financial trail, the computer forensics, it all pointed to a calculated fraud designed to steal my inheritance. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Christie got 18 months in prison and was ordered to pay restitution for the legal costs and emotional distress she'd caused. Angela got 2 years. Both of them would have felony records that would follow them for the rest of their lives. On the day of sentencing, Christie's lawyer allowed me to make a victim impact statement. I'd thought long and hard about what I wanted to say. "Your Honor," I began, standing at the podium in the packed courtroom, "the defendant didn't just steal money from me. She stole my faith in the person I loved most. She made me believe I was broken, defective, incapable of giving her what she wanted. She let me suffer with that belief for weeks while she planned her new life with my inheritance." I looked over at Christie, who was staring at the table in front of her. But, in the end, her greed exposed her true character. And that allowed me to find someone who actually deserves my trust and love. Someone who's carrying my child right now, proving that everything the defendant tried to make me believe about myself was a lie. Judge Martinez nodded solemnly. "Mr. Harris, I hope you can find peace in the knowledge that justice has been served." "I already have, Your Honor." 6 months later, Rachel and I were married in a small ceremony at the lakeside property my father had left me. She was showing now, radiant in a simple white dress that accommodated her growing belly. As we exchanged vows with Lake Erie sparkling behind us, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us here. Christie was serving her sentence at the Women's Correctional Facility in Marysville. The settlement from my civil suit against both her and Angela had more than covered Rachel's maternity leave and set up a college fund for our child. "Funny how things work out," Rachel said that night as we sat on the dock, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. "What do you mean?" She placed my hand on her belly, where our son was growing strong and healthy. "You spent months thinking you couldn't have children. Now you're about to have one with someone who actually loves you." I felt the baby kick against my palm and smiled. Maybe Dad knew what he was doing after all. How so? Leaving me that inheritance. It's what exposed Christie's true nature. If we'd still been broke, she might have stayed married to me out of convenience. I never would have known what she was really like. Rachel leaned against my shoulder. Or maybe she would have found another reason to leave. Some people always do. As the stars came out over the lake, I thought about the choices that had led us here. Christie's greed, Angela's willingness to commit fraud for a friend, my father's quiet wisdom in building wealth and leaving it to someone who wouldn't squander it, Rachel's integrity in fighting for the truth, even when it would have been easier to just process another divorce case. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. Sometimes it's just about the truth finally coming to light. Our son was born on a crisp October morning, healthy and perfect. When the nurse placed him in my arms for the first time, I thought about all the tests and reports and lies that had tried to convince me this moment would never happen. 3 years later, I ran into Connor Lane at a hardware store downtown. He looked older, smaller somehow. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by something tired and defeated. "Tommy," he said, seeming genuinely surprised to see me. "How are you?" "Good," I said. "Really good. I heard about everything. The trial, I mean. I'm sorry it all happened like that." I studied his face, looking for signs of the deception I'd become so good at recognizing. But he seemed genuine, maybe even ashamed. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "About what she did. The fake test results, the fraud. I thought you really couldn't. I thought that's why she left. Would it have mattered if you'd known?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, maybe. Probably not." "Why not?" "Because I was lying too." He let out a bitter laugh. "The whole fitness coach thing? The success she thought I represented? It was all fake. I was living off credit cards and borrowed money, trying to keep up appearances until I could figure out what to do with my life." What happened when she got arrested? I panicked. Ran. Couldn't risk being associated with someone facing fraud charges when I was barely keeping my own life together. He shook his head. I'm not proud of it. Where are you now? Working construction, trying to pay off debt and rebuild. It's honest work, at least. There was something poetic about it. Connor had ended up doing the same kind of work I'd been doing when Christy decided I wasn't successful enough for her. Good luck, I said, and meant it. You too, and congratulations. I heard about the baby. Thanks. As he walked away, I thought about how differently all our lives had turned out. Christy had gambled everything on a lie and lost. Connor had built his life on pretense and watched it collapse. Rachel and I had faced the truth head on and found something real. That evening, I told Rachel about the encounter while we watched our son crawl around the living room, babbling happily as he explored his world. Do you ever feel sorry for her? Rachel asked. For Christy? I thought about it. Sometimes, but not for what happened to her, for what she chose to become. There's a difference? She could have talked to me about feeling trapped or unfulfilled. She could have suggested counseling or separation. She could have been honest about wanting the money. Instead, she chose to destroy me psychologically to make herself feel better about stealing from me. Rachel nodded. Some people, when they're faced with a choice between taking responsibility for their feelings and blaming someone else, will always choose blame. And some people, I said, watching our son pull himself up against the coffee table, choose to build something better instead of tearing other people down. Good thing I found one of the builders. Christy had been right about one thing. The truth did find its way through. It just wasn't the truth she'd been hoping for. The final irony came 2 years later, when I learned through mutual acquaintances that Christy had been released from prison and was working at a discount retail store in a town about an hour away. She was living in a studio apartment and taking the bus to work. The yoga studio had fired her when the scandal broke, and no other fitness facility would hire someone with a fraud conviction. Meanwhile, Rachel's law practice was thriving. We'd bought a bigger house near the lake, and she just found out she was pregnant with our second child. This time, there were no tests, no doubts, no questions. Just the quiet joy of a family growing together. Sometimes the universe doesn't give you what you want. Sometimes it gives you what you deserve. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those two things turn out to be the same.